What's up, everyone? Kevin Carrillo here, and welcome to another episode of the Cannabinoid Connect podcast. My guest today is Rena Sherbill, host of the Cannabis Investing podcast and senior editor for Seeking Alpha. Rena Sherbill, you're back again. How are you?
Great to be here, Kevin. Happy to be here. Thank you. How you doing?
I'm doing well. As I mentioned before we started recording, it's kind of a hectic month. I got a lot of podcasts that we're recording. Plus, I got a move that's happening at the end of the month. My fiance and I move into a different neighborhood in the Dallas area. So just trying to get everything straightened out before the 30th.
Well, wish you good luck. As I said to you, moving is like one of the banes of life's existences. So good luck to you. And working while moving is, a doubly respectable effort. So I hope the move brings you guys lots of luck and a lot of blessings in this complicated, confusing, insane year.
Exactly. I know, just another wrench to throw into 2020. But
Or a good change. It's always nice.
yeah, I mean, we'll be closer to more outdoor activities and things to do. So that's a plus, especially having three dogs, so they'll have more room to run around and enjoy the grass. So we're excited.
There you go. There you go. I think everybody that lives either in a city or close to a city is like looking to get out to like at least a patch of nature somewhere. We went up to the country like a couple weeks ago and I was like, oh, we got to get out of the city. Like the city during this time is just, it's intense.
It's so intense with all the regulations and requirements for, all these different things. And I know that these safety protocols need to be in place with all the spikes that are occurring. But if you're not used to it, it's a hard transition for some people,
Yeah.
But I've seen, like, to your point, some friends that are talking to each other on social media and saying, hey, let's put our money together and let's find some land and let's just, start our own community, basically, It's funny.
I think this is going to change people's like trajectories. I know in the heels of 9/11, I had just moved out of New York at the time, but so many of my friends that were still in New York like left New York after 9/11. And I mean, sometimes these cataclysmic, and not sometimes, I think every time, unfortunately, fortunately, these cataclysmic events like, shock people and change people's like, I think, take on things.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that we're still like right in the middle of it. You know what I mean? Like the dust hasn't settled at all yet. So, 2 to 3 years from now, I think the world, especially different countries, are going to look like a different place. There's going to be a lot of change for sure.
I agree. It's pretty crazy. I think we have a sense that it's going to be like some of these changes that are being, implemented are going to be long lasting. And I think some things we have an idea what those things are going to be. And I think some things are going to come at us from like over here and we're going to be like, what, that also? Like what?
Well, every day when I'm scrolling in my Twitter feed, I'm like, okay, what's the new news? What other scandals happening now? Or it's great.
I know. Super important to take a break from that because I find myself like, yeah, it's a lot, man. It's a lot. Between work and living and living through this, it's just so much. And moving on your plate, it's a lot for the human mind and soul to deal with.
Yeah, well, that's why this podcast is such a blessing, because it's my way to escape and not, educate myself and meet awesome people like you, but then also hopefully add value to our listeners, who are very interested in the cannabis space. So with that, so for the audience, just to let them know, so Rena has been on before, and we'd love to have her on, so much so that we want to have her on once a month. So for a little background, Rena Sherbill is the podcast host of the Cannabis Investing podcast within Seeking Alpha. So we want to have her on each month to talk about market trends and to just give everyone a pulse as to what's happening within the industry and companies to look out for and maybe companies to avoid.
really, really excited to come on board in a regular fashion. And I'm also happy to hear like if people want to like send us comments or questions that they or themes for us to cover. I'm super excited to branch out to a different audience and hear from them and see what you guys want to hear about and what I can offer. And, talking before what you just said, before my more official intro, about being in the podcasts in the cannabis world right now and how much that's giving you some kind of like solace and purpose. I feel like it does. And for me too, I feel the exact same way. And I feel like, especially now during this time, I feel like cannabis is like, I mean, it's a wonder plant and a great thing in general. And I think during this time when there is so much anxiety and confusion and also, frankly, like people losing money and losing their jobs, and there are, I think, I will say at the outset, I am not a financial advisor. I am not a professional financial advisor. Invest at your own risk. Do your own due diligence. Do your own research. I am not advising what to buy or what to sell. I'm simply giving you knowledge that I have picked up and that I am filtering through my own podcast lens and my own Seeking Alpha financial lens. And also from the cannabis angle, I like to highlight companies that are doing things well and responsibly, but also doing something that makes sense for the world in a positive way when possible, if possible. And I think it tends to be that in the cannabis world, I don't want to misspeak, but it does kind of tend to go hand in hand. I feel like not every time, obviously, but I think the shady operators, you can kind of smell it coming, you can see it coming. And the more responsible ones are doing good things and pushing themselves to evolve the cannabis industry. Anyways, I've really gone off on a tangent, but I did want to impart like the beauty of being and talking about cannabis right now, because it is we're learning so much about it, and it's just super, I think, helpful.
Well, and to reiterate what you're saying, yes, Rena's completely right. Do your due diligence. We are just talking about the trends that she is seeing within the lens of Seeking Alpha and her podcast. So it is on you to really do the research and make the decisions for the best investment for yourself. So thank you for that disclaimer, Rena. But going back to what you're saying, yes, I totally agree. So, little backstory on me. So, I mentioned this before on the podcast. I've been an advocate of cannabis and a user for over 10 years. And, during this pandemic really I saw it as an opportunity because I did fall into that trap initially of, okay, well, what's going on politically? What moves are being made? What are people saying? What's this? What's that? And and I was engaging in some of those Twitter battles and whatnot. But then after a couple of days, I'm like, this is just not healthy and sustainable, at all. Like you said earlier, you need to step back and really kind of clear your mind of some of this stuff, because if you're entrenched in it and consuming it all day long, it can be very toxic. So I just saw the opportunity. You know what? Even though there is stigma associated with the cannabis plant, there is tons of public support, more so than any time now. So I thought, you know what, now's the time to really come out and take a position where we can actually educate and inform the public about the medicinal benefits and the economic impact that the industrial hemp market can have. So that was really my kind of, way to say, you know what, let's not flood your mind with all of this fighting back and forth and political stuff that's going on. While it's important to, stay on top of it, it's not, you can also do different things to keep your mind occupied. And so this was just a great outlet for me. And it's been a blessing, like I said, to meet people like you and to learn more about what's going on. So.
That's awesome. I also think it's, kudos to you and to people that are like, there's a lot of scary things that are happening right now in terms of the economy, in terms of like people's mental health, how they're approaching life. And I think it is maybe more natural to be like, wow, I cannot deal with this. And I'm just going to go down, a rabbit hole of fear. But I think if we find the thing that can bring us meaning, I think even within this, and even on top of that, give something back, and teach people and bring people to something. I know people that, for instance, are in the wellness industry. And when this happened, when lockdown happened across the world, they were teaching at studios and, everything one-on-one. And they're like, what am I going to do? Like, what am I going to do?
Mm.
And they switched to virtual format, and their business is better than it was, going to all these studios, and they're not having to drive as much. And so it's not always so easy. It's not always so cut and dry, but I do feel like if you have something to, change or move forward or bring to the table that I feel like this time is like really pushing people to pivot or to understand where it is that maybe they can serve in a different way. So I think it's awesome. And yeah, like you said, the great thing about having a podcast is meeting the people and talking to people. And I like when people say to me, well, what's your typical interview like? And obviously there are certain like way I structure an interview that is similar, but I also think each person is pretty different, and what they bring to the interview just naturally, brings its own kind of vibe and theme and trajectory of the conversation. So yeah, it's I love the podcast, and I'm happy to be a part of it.
Well, we're happy to have you. And I just to piggyback on what you're saying, I'm such a big fan, obviously, of the podcast format, right? Because so much so in the mainstream media today, one, either you're being fed information that has some type of agenda backing it, or it's out of context, right? It's little clips, it's little sound bites, it's cuts here, it's cuts there. The podcast format is so unique and great because it's long form. You really get to, like you were saying earlier, every person or guest on a podcast brings their own vibe and their own style and energy to the discussion. And so that's really what I love about it, because if you have time to listen or even watch a podcast, you can truly understand where that person is coming from, if they're full of shit or not, if they're genuine. It's just great. And I really enjoyed doing it. I don't know.
Yeah, something else I always really like is I'll be thinking that I'm going to talk to this person and I'm going to like glean these insights from them and get this information, and I want to ask them about this, and even honestly as a listener, not just as a host, but when I'm listening to podcasts, oftentimes the most interesting or the most salient takeaway for me is hearing like maybe how they approach something or the conversation they had leading up to that big deal, or the kind of failure they had before this, kind of the smaller things. I'm like, oh, interesting. That happens to like you also, or, it's just so interesting to hear people's life story. I think it just is such a fascinating way to learn about the world,
Well, human beings are so fascinating because we're all so different, right? Like not only personality wise, interest wise, but even like things we consume, right? The way in which our body reacts to certain things, like we're all so very unique. And I think that there's a lot of times where, there are stereotypes or there's labels or they put you in some box or some bucket, but really everybody is so different, and we're just an amazing species that with podcasts, it really allows you to showcase those different types of personalities and qualities within each person, and it's just amazing.
Absolutely.
How do you think have you gotten a better, like as a better conversationalist doing your podcast? How long have you been doing your podcast? That's, I guess, good for.
I started in like March of 2019, so okay. Like about almost a year and a half. I do feel like I've gotten a lot better at, look, I will say that I feel like I have always had an affinity for talking, also interviewing people. Like the story that, honestly, I didn't remember this until I started podcasting, but when I was like in junior high, I wanted to learn guitar and I started taking lessons, but I found myself when I was in my room supposed to be practicing, I was like recording myself as though I was on a radio show, interviewing myself, and I was much more excited about the talking part. So I always had, I always liked it, or like if I'm on a tour of something, I'm always volunteering to like do the speaking, like stuff like that. A bit of a ham. Um, but I did find that look, there's a couple stages, I think. At the beginning, it's like you're just starting out, and, even combining the technical aspects of the audio and the sound and the wires and the Zen. I just used a Hebrew word. Like the first time I interviewed somebody, I had the wrong microphone and the sound is like terrible. And like I had mistakenly tested it out on somebody with a much more booming voice, and the person I interviewed, his voice was like, much softer. And so there's like that, being comfortable with the technical aspects, knowing what, equipment you need, stuff like that, and just becoming comfortable with having those both in your head. But I also found that, like, I would say after 6 months, once kind of the nerves work themselves out and I wasn't so intimidated by interviewing kind of people that are high up, I did find that I needed to teach myself to really deeply listen to people's answers and not be ready with my next question.
Yeah.
That for me is like, that took me a few months to even understand I needed to learn. And I'm trying to do that better every single interview.
Yeah, no, I can totally relate to that. First, like you mentioned, the comfort thing, right? Like just getting out of your comfort zone, getting comfortable with the whole format and the technical aspect. You got to nail that down. I had a horror story for one episode where I was talking to the guy, and first off, his connection kept cutting out. So we had to like pause and then like restart, and I recorded multiple times, but the video after the recording, it didn't convert. So we recorded for like an hour, and I thought I lost the video, and I thought we had to re-record, but fortunately I was able to recover it. So there's those technical things that you learn, but the main point that I am taking is what you said about the listening, right? Because before, I would have like my notes up, and while I want it to be an open dialogue and not so Q&A format, I would always I'd ask the question, we'd talk a little bit, but I'd be ready for the next subject matter, right? Or the next topic.
Yeah.
And instead of like my mind thinking that, I needed to be more into the conversation. So I'm trying to train myself to just really be a better listener and respond to what the person is saying. And then if the conversation naturally pivots or goes a different direction, then of course that's how it goes, but listening is key. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a lesson for, especially where we are now in this time. I think be here now, like as a podcast host, you need to be prepared, but you really also just need to be present. I think if you're prepared and present, conversations go in a really great direction for the most part.
So where can we find those hidden videos of you interviewing yourself at a young age? That's hilarious.
Probably you're going to have to search through some garbage bags in a basement somewhere in the suburbs of Chicago. Yeah, I'm not sure that they exist, but but maybe someday somebody's going to really punk me with some of them.
So is that where you're initially from, Chicago?
Yeah, a suburb north of the city, from the age of 3 to when I went to college in New York. Yeah.
Okay. And I don't know if we talked about this in our first podcast, but so you went to college in New York, and then from there, did you move out of the country right away? Or, because I know you're in Tel Aviv, Israel now. So
yeah, I was planning on going to San Francisco with 2 friends, and I had just come back from my junior year abroad. I had graduated college. But based on those contacts, I was offered a job in Israel, and instead of going to, it's like, paths diverge and people make these life decisions. And that was a big one for me. I ended up staying, and,
wow.
and making my life here. So yeah, it was a salient moment.
Right. Well, it seems to all be working out, so.
Yeah. A lot of great things about Tel Aviv, a lot of great things about living here.
Absolutely. I hope to go visit one day.
Hope to have you here. Hope to do this one day on the beach.
Yes, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
So Rena, tell us about what is going on this month in terms of the cannabis market. What trends are you seeing? Give us some newspaper headlines And then we can kind of dig deeper into what's going on, maybe talk about some specific companies.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, I think we talked last time the fact that COVID brought about cannabis being essential, and what a paradigm shift that was. I think both for companies, I was talking to somebody yesterday and they were saying like right when the lockdowns went into effect, they were like, so many businesses were like, are we going to survive? And the fact that they were deemed essential, obviously, like really saved the industry in a lot of ways, certainly saved a lot of companies. And I think for a while after that period, we were seeing just pretty consistent growth in terms of sales and in terms of, the fact that they were pivoting into curbside delivery and home delivery and really making it work for them, but also increasing sales at the same time. And then I would say in the past month, it's just been really hard to kind of see what's happening because some companies are doing really well, like at the top of the food chain in the cannabis world, like companies like Trulieve, they've gone up like a few dollars, I think, over the past few months. They've gone up over like $3 maybe in the past month. And then you're seeing companies like Chiron, which is in my cannabis portfolio, which I'm bullish on. They have an opportunity to be kind of like the first mover in Colombia in South America.
We actually had their CEO on. I had
Oh, Alvaro?
Alvaro Torres. He came on.
Nice.
Chiron. They have their whole beauty line that they opened up. Quita, I think is what it's called.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're doing a lot of great things in Colombia. It sounds like they're really leading the way out there.
Yeah, that's awesome that you talked to him. I have to listen to that. Yeah, they're doing great things, and I'm excited about the company. And everybody talks about how great their management is and how dedicated they are to the community down there and the patients and the consumers down there. The stock has like gone off a cliff. It's just kind of like sinking. There's some other ones, so it's like, look, people will say that there are, kind of the disadvantages to the COVID thing are that there were guidance numbers and guided, how much a company is going to order for how much a company is going to grow to produce that much inventory. Like MetaPharm is a company that comes to mind that they guided for a certain amount, but because there was an oversupply and because of the supply chain got messed up because of COVID, they weren't, they just had all this extra inventory and they had to write that off, and their stock also took a dive. So there are reasons a lot of times, but there are some that I'm not sure why they're going down so fast. So I would say the thing that I'm taking away from the cannabis sector right now is there's a lot of volatility, and there kind of always is. And there's certainly, I think I talked about it a lot last time also, that there's been a ton of volatility over the past year and a half. And then I thought COVID was kind of going to suss out the winners and the losers. But it's definitely not that clear right now because I still think Chiron's going to go up, but I also couldn't exactly tell you why their stock is going so precipitously down. Mm-hmm. Other than, I could make some guesses, the fact that South America isn't going as fast as people would have liked. They might not have enough cash on hand to survive all the challenges that are, afoot. So there's different things, obviously the companies that are closer to profitability are gonna like Trulieve, like Air Strategies, which is also a multi-state operator, an MSO that people really like. So yeah, I would say it's a tough time right now. And also the other thing that I think can't be discounted is all the new investors that are in the market, that are pushing up, especially cannabis stocks. I read an article this week that said most of the investors in the cannabis space are new investors, especially now, with COVID and, the brokerages doing no pay commission, no commission trades, no pay commission. No commission trades, it's exploded this thing. So I think there are a few variables, but volatility is definitely on the sector.
Yeah, no, and I've seen that also. Like, within my portfolio, there's couple of companies that are doing really well, and then a lot of them are still in the red that have been in the red for a while, right? One that's doing real well, Grow Generation. Um,
Yeah.
they've been doing really well, and I've also noticed. I think we talked about last time. YCBD or
Yeah.
EMD. YCBD is their ticker.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
they're doing really well, and then Afria is one that seems to be doing really well.
It was interesting. Afria specifically, did you see the news that they were almost going to buy up Aurora, which had been, the number two? Yeah, yeah. It's really interesting to hear about.
Yeah, I've been getting beaten up by Aurora, man. They're up and down. What is going on with Aurora?
Are they still a holding of yours? Are you holding on to that?
They are, but when the last time I looked, because I try to keep up with it as much as I can, but I know that what did they do? Did they consolidate? Because their stock price is completely different from what I bought it initially. It's like it's over $100 now. So what did they do?
I'm pretty sure they did a stock split at some point because they were going so. The whole company just kind of, we were talking about companies, to look out for. I would say companies that are growing, no, with no regard for kind of like what maybe is going to be like they've had to sell off a ton of assets or consolidate that in Europe. They put a ton of money into Europe. I think they're needing to either write that off or take heavy losses on it. I think they just grew recklessly, and a lot of people saw that coming. Deborah Borchardt, who I think was on your show also,
Yes.
she was on my podcast like a year ago, and she was saying how they were behaving irresponsibly. So if you're paying attention, which we both know everybody out there should be, got to do your own due diligence.
Yeah.
If you're paying attention, the numbers are there, but I think also like people suffer from the stocks that everybody talks about. And everybody was always talking about Aurora, and they had a bunch of cash and their share price looked really nice, and they were in Canada and people were really excited about Canada. But like also another perfect example, all the people that were excited about Canada because they went legal, but it's like how much money was in there and how much money can be taken out. It's not like a limitless funnel. So I think they really suffered from overcapitalization and inflated share prices. And I think a lot of people took a hit on those Canadian stocks.
Mm-hmm.
Canopy Growth, I mean, it's not doing as badly as Aurora, but also, they're all kind of taking hits. I do wonder if Afria is kind of going to become the leader of that Canadian LP space, though. It does kind of seem like they might.
It seems like it, right? I mean, they've been slow and steady and continually progressing. It seems like, whereas Aurora has been much more volatile.
Yeah.
So
And have had like management changes, and I think the companies that had management changes, like in the past few months, I think were a reflection of the fact that the management that was in place was there to get them started, but not necessarily the best management to responsibly grow a company with the best financial practices.
right, and I could totally see that because I mean, Aurora went out and became an official sponsor of the UFC, and so many. I mean, their marketing was huge. They were, but it didn't seem like they had a long-term plan.
Yeah. There's companies that can, and look, talking about what I've learned on my podcast so far, I've also learned this. There's the salesman companies, there's the salesman management who are selling a company's place in the sector and marketing their company as such. I would say Aurora was one of them. I would say Harvest Health is one of them. Did a ton of deals, and with all of those headlines, bought more and more retail investors on because I think it excites people. I'm like, oh my gosh, they're gonna like grab the market here. Oh my gosh, they're building up more assets. Like, oh my gosh, like what could possibly go wrong? Look at how much money they have. Like, and then guess what happens? They have no more money left, and things they thought were gonna pan out did not pan out. And in the meantime, companies focus like, speaking of Trulieve, some say I might talk about them too much, but they are biggest holding, and I love the company because they stay true to their business model, which was they were focused on Florida. They did that really well. Like Liberty Health was another competitor in Florida. They didn't do as well, and the less well that Liberty Health did, the more Trulieve doubled down on that market, and now like owns that market, and now takes what they've learned there and can build that. They're starting to do that in Massachusetts now. Yeah, I think if you look at a company and you like their financials and you like their strategy and they stand for something, and when I say stand for something, not just something environment or sustainable or social justice, but standing for something in the way that you have to stand as an entire company. I think if a company stands for fiscal responsibility, showing up for the communities that they're building a company in and selling product to, and also trying to confront, acknowledge, and help improve the gross injustice that exists in the cannabis industry, I would put my money on them.
No, that's a good point. Those are all good indicators, right? Like looking at a company's values, mission statement, and then basically like living what they're preaching, right?
Yeah.
And it sounds like Trulieve does that. There's other companies that aren't and have been a little shady. I know you've mentioned Madman being another one they've been going through some issues.
Yeah. Well documented. Well documented.
Right. So, when you're looking at various cannabis stocks, especially during a time during COVID, right, where there's this pandemic, the world is kind of, shut down. Do you look at investment opportunities from a vertical standpoint? So like you mentioned earlier, there's some companies that had to cut their losses because they had too much product that they couldn't sell or couldn't get rid of, right? But maybe there's other companies that are in the like grow generation. They're a cultivar. They provide, I think, equipment for cultivation. And correct me if I'm wrong on that. But do you look at companies that are in different verticals that may have an advantage during this time as opposed to others that may not?
Yeah, I was just talking to a venture capitalist yesterday about this very thing. It's an important and great question about the cannabis space, because grow generation is also in my model cannabis portfolio, and it is an ancillary player, which means it doesn't touch the plant directly. Yeah, I think there's a lot to be taken from the non-plant touching part of the sector. I was asking him mostly what he thinks about like the blockchain sector and what he thinks about the security sector. And he said something I thought was interesting, which is, he does think I've talked to a couple of people that, and throughout my podcast, it's, blockchain is such a buzzword. It's hard to get an educated answer about that, because I think a lot of people are talking about it without totally understanding everything that goes around blockchain and understanding the legality. Yeah.
Let's give the audience just a brief definition of blockchain. I think I could do it, but I don't want to butcher it. I'll let you do it if you're comfortable.
Oh, I will definitely butcher it. But the way that I understand blockchain is how I'm describing it is the fact that cannabis is not legal and doesn't, companies can't afford themselves the banking practices that a regular company would be privy to. So blockchain affords them to, pay and accept money without it being cash. So it's not cryptocurrency, but it's moving money like that. You can probably, please feel free to add to that.
I'll add to it. You're right from that standpoint. From the technology perspective, my understanding is that basically it's a way to, like, if you're transferring data from one server or one destination to another, what blockchain does is it kind of piecemeals and breaks up that data and transfers it in a way that no one, like, it's a security measure. It's like a way to effectively transfer, like you said, money or whatever it is, but in a secure way that it's so that the data is not all intact. I believe. I could be wrong. Please tell me in the comments if I totally ruined it and correct us. But Yeah, that was mine.
Feel free to now Google what is blockchain.
Look it up. Why don't we look it up? We got.
Um,
Go ahead.
yeah, no, yeah. So just as you know, the thing that so there's like things I think to look for. There's trends that I think are coming, like blockchain. I could not tell you the companies. I think mostly they're private at this point. Um, in terms, yeah, go ahead.
It says blockchain is a system of recording information in a way that makes it difficult or impossible to change, hack, or cheat the system. A blockchain is essentially a digital ledger of transactions that is duplicated and distributed across the entire network of computer systems on the blockchain. So it's a secure way to transfer data. So to your point, because of the banking issues and how it's so hard to bank in the cannabis space as of right now, blockchain makes it a bit easier, right? Because you're not working directly with the bank, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. And then I imagine you can also be doing like, the selling of the product. I mean, I don't, the truth is I'm not even going to speak on this because I don't understand it well enough. But there is, I think, to speak to to the notion of trends, and it's funny. I mean, I was talking to this venture capitalist, and he's like super entrenched in the space, more than I am. He's been in it since 2014. And he was like, yeah, I do not totally understand the blockchain myself. And so we're not invested at all in this space, but I do think it's, but he likes to invest in things he can really wrap his head around. So he wasn't invested in it. But I've heard from other people that it's definitely a trend. And I've been hearing it for a while, but you can imagine why it would be something to look for. But he also mentioned something interesting, which is, people are also excited about the security plays, especially as the sector is kind of figuring itself out and growing from a nascent, mostly black market industry to, progressing into a legal one. How to protect the dispensaries, how to protect the product, how to protect, but he was saying something interesting, and I think especially true because of COVID. I would say that COVID will likely speed up, the legalization of cannabis, even if it's in a state by state approach. I think more states will be going legal, for revenue purposes, if not for the other amazing reasons why they should be going legal. So I think once it does progressively go more legal, become more legal, we'll probably have less need for those security measures because they'll have more, real secure places of business, and they won't be reliant on kind of like outside sources of that. So I think it's also important as an investor to keep your eye on the company, but also understand where the sector is going. Like for instance, is the company only dealing with flower? Flower is always going to be part of the industry, but there's also like with edibles, like you could be looking at an extraction company, and the fact that oils are going to be so, already are, and I think will continue to even grow more. So yeah, I definitely like the ancillary players, Grow Generation being at the top of not just mine, it's a lot of favorite people's stock. They're fiscally responsible. They trade on a major exchange because they're an ancillary player, so they have that advantage. There's definitely a lot to like from the non-plant touching part of the sector.
Mm-hmm. I mean, even like you talk about with even digging deeper into the ancillary players, like I know that Scott's Miracle Grow, right? They're kind of interested in the cannabis sector from a soil and nutrient standpoint. Is that right?
Yeah, they're more like a fertilizer company, and yeah, they've branched into the cannabis sector, and it's interesting. Scott's Miracle Grow, they're like a big on most ETFs, they're a holding, because again, one of the benefits of ancillary players is they're going to trade on a major exchange because they don't have to deal with the question of being illegal. So that's one advantage, and the other advantage is like Scott's Miracle Grow. I mean, it's an established business, away from the cannabis sector. So it seems like that's, a lot of people like their business, period. and like the fact that they've already gotten into the cannabis sector and feel like that's just a natural fit, and they'll be able to keep growing, for lack of a
Right.
better word. Yeah.
And even like what is interesting is with the industrial hemp market, you know, really starting to take off with the Farm Bill passing in 2018. Texas is in their first grow season. You know, we're starting to see that that industry is not vertically integrated at all, right? And so the big hiccup that we're going to see in the next couple of years is the processing challenges. There's not enough processors to process these hemp plants, right, on a massive scale. So I think that there's going to be a huge opportunity the next couple of years for, you know, these decortization equipment and whatnot to really extract the fiber and the herd from these plants. So that's going to be a whole other, you know, industry that we'll be looking at as well when we're thinking about creating products and materials from the plant.
Absolutely. I mean, hemp is like a commodity that is, I think, going to change the face of things in so many ways because of its industrial properties and how it's being used. I mean, it's as you mentioned, it's starting with the Farm Bill, but I think that market is really just figuring itself out. Like it's only just starting to. Um, yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting to see. I mean, hemp is going to be like a commodity, you know, traded like any other commodity at some point. Um, yeah, it's definitely exciting. And also to your point, you know, like there's a company Exactus that was dealing with water filtration in California, and I think 6 months ago they partnered with a cannabis grower, Graham Farrar, up in California. And now they're growing hemp, you know, and just it's and they talk about it as a natural pivot. You know, you have a bunch of sun, you've been, you know, growing things already, and so now it's just kind of like a natural pivot. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see who does it well and who kind of incorporates it into their business model successfully, I think.
That'll be a fun topic or industry for you to cover once it really starts getting going, because that's like a whole other world, right? I mean, you're going to
Yeah.
have so much to talk about.
Yeah.
And that's exciting. So we'll see what develops there.
Yeah. Yeah. I hope, you know, a lot of, I think the holdup is just the regulations. And I just hope the regulations are, um, keep coming in a productive manner. I think there's been so many holdups, and look, right now it's challenging to get through anything. People are just focused on this, but I think the challenges of creating an entire industry kind of anew are challenging. So I think that's been a lot of the frustration for companies. But yeah, there's tremendous opportunity, and I think with each passing year, it's going to continue to kind of work itself out and mature into like a, you know, a serious industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And not to mention potentially replace some legacy industries, or at least be competitive against those, right? I mean, you think about the lumber industry and how we make paper. Well, you have to put seeds in the ground to plant trees, and those trees take hundreds of years to grow, right? And the hemp cycle is like 90 days.
Yeah.
So it's going to be very interesting for sure. And I can't wait to kind of see that unfold. So,
Yeah, I think I hope we get to see it grow as it should, because it'll be nice to see without interference from other interested parties. It would be great to see hemp become like return to its place in the American and global industry.
it was part of life back in the day, right? I mean, up until the 1930s, I mean, we were feeding our livestock and cattle with the hemp seeds. Birds, domestic and non-domestic birds were eating, you know, hemp seed. We would use hemp oil for lamps and for cooking, and uh, families had hemp patches, right? I mean, where they would just
Yeah,
maybe 12 stalks of hemp and they'd make rope and twine, and I mean, it was just part of life, you know.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
that damn war on drugs, Harry Anslinger.
Oh
I'm
my God.
not supposed to say his name. We say that he's the one, the one we do not name, or from
Yeah,
Harry Potter. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I would agree. How utterly ridiculous. You know, it's funny. Something that I've been talking with some guests about is this notion of the fact that alcohol prohibition was repealed right after the Great Depression, and how a lot of people think that prohibition against cannabis will be rolled back once kind of we work ourselves out of COVID. But it's an interesting parallel how we finally, as a society, can break off the chains of, really ridiculous, laws.
Yeah, and to your point earlier, I think that COVID, like one of we talked about the positive outcomes of COVID, and I think that that will be one. No one
Yeah.
knows the exact time, but once the dust settles, obviously there are a lot of small businesses that are going out of business, even medium-sized businesses that can't keep up. So the economic potential that cannabis brings to the various states, I think that these lawmakers are going to have their eyes open and say, you know what, let's rethink this. Let's consider that, because there could be a lot of economic value from taxation.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Let's hope. Let's
That's
hope.
fingers crossed. Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
So what are your predictions in the next month? So we're coming toward the end of July. What are you kind of expecting to see in the market come August? When we talk again, obviously you can't predict the future, and we'll learn as we go. But what are you kind of seeing now in terms of trends?
Yeah, it definitely cannot predict the future. But going back to Trulieve, something that is exciting and a catalyst for them, but also a catalyst in Florida. So if you like Liberty Health down there, also Curaleaf has a position there. Um, that edibles are likely to go online in 2020. And in general, Florida's like a huge cannabis market. I'm blanking on the team that came out with it, but there was a team last week that came out with how strong growth is in Florida. It's just like through the roof. Um, there's really quick adoption rates for people that weren't even, consumers before it went medically legal. And I think people are really excited about new products down there. So that's one catalyst. I don't know if that's going to happen by August, but people do think it's going to happen this year. Um, and the other thing I would say is, watch for companies' guidance, because a lot of companies took away their guidance for the next quarter. So any reporting that companies do, not earnings, but reporting on inventory, reporting on their statements, reporting on any deals, reporting on debt that is owed, how they're paying off that debt. I think it's important to see what companies are doing between earning cycles, because it's so uncertain what numbers are coming in. I mean, we can't even like go off projections right now because it's so uncertain. So I would say really in the next like month or two is to, and also honestly, I think so much is happening around the election. There's so much talk about cannabis, and I think it gets people really excited. I think the closer we keep getting to the election, I think the more people will be talking about cannabis and be getting excited about it. Um, I don't have like a hard and fast thing that I'm looking for in the upcoming months, but I would say those are good things to be paying attention to.
Yeah, no, that's you bring up the election upcoming in November, and I think that you're right. As we get closer to that time frame, there's going to be a lot more discussion. Whether it's on both sides or just one side of the political spectrum. But I know I read something about Biden kind of hinting toward the idea of descheduling and maybe classifying cannabis or marijuana as Schedule 2. But again, I don't know how real that is. But
Yeah.
that I've talked to, descheduling to Schedule 2 really won't help the industry much. You know what I mean? Is what some have said. It needs to be completely kind of legal for us to kind of remove those restraints and handcuffs that we've had for so long, both from a learning and peer review study standpoint, but then also an economic and financial standpoint.
Well, that's right. It's not just, I mean, look, there's the component that everybody sitting in jail for cannabis should be out of jail.
Absolutely.
There's that point,
Yeah.
the decriminalization factor is, number one. But the other side of that is what you're saying is is the dearth in research that we've had, around cannabis. And only this past year did the United States say that it could be done in another place than it was done at some university forever. I feel like University of Missouri. I can't remember exactly, but some small university where they were doing research, and that was the only place where they were allowed to do research on cannabis.
I know that I know that the University of Texas at Arlington, UTA, has a whole division. Dr. Zach Hildebrand is on. He's a scientist, and they have all lab equipment. I forget the name of the company. It's a Chinese company that provides the lab equipment, but they're really well known. I think they start with an S. But they're into it. So I don't know if that's the university you're talking about, but I know UTA in Texas has a program where they're learning more about the cannabinoids every day.
Well, now they are, but I think I'm looking it up for you right now, as long as we're checking our facts. Um, it wasn't University of Texas. It was so I'm not finding it at first glance, so I'm not going to look into it. But
What
um,
you're saying is this university you're talking about was the first, but since then, of course, other universities have
but
sprung.
like only, yeah, but like real government funded study on cannabis was only done in one place up until like last year, which is insane.
Crazy, yeah. And
Yeah.
to these geneticists and whatnot, you ask, okay, well, from an international standpoint, like where do we stack up when it comes to technology? And they're like, oh man, we got the technology, we have the equipment, we have everything we need. It's just,
Yeah.
like, we're barely catching up when it comes to the legalities.
Yeah. Yeah.
Playing
Yeah.
catch up basically is what it is. So
What's that?
they put it in a way that we're playing catch up basically.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. 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 Yeah. It's the practices that have been put in place are really ridiculous in a lot of ways.
Yep. And that is a great point when you talk about the people that have been locked up because, hey, these are deemed essential businesses now, so
Yeah.
why are these people still being punished and locked up for petty cannabis offenses they did 20 years ago?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I posted on the Cannabinoid Connect Instagram the other day about Joe Rogan had Oliver Stone on, and one part of the podcast, he talks about how he was locked up for an ounce of weed in Mexico that he had brought back from like Peru, I think, or Puerto Rico. I'm not sure where, but he had to have his dad called to get him out. And if he wouldn't have, he would have stayed for years probably, and that was right during the time of the war on drugs when there was that sweep of the sweep of psychedelics in the 1970s, which was really aimed toward, the minority groups and really stigmatizing cannabis by naming it marijuana. Right.
Mhm. Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, it's horrific. There are like just so many horrific stories and people that have suffered through just unconscionable policy, and you have to think that there's like some nefarious thought process that went behind that for sure, with racist overtones or undertones definitely there. Yeah, and I think it's our job to combat that, and in whatever way we can. But it's look, this time it's like, we were talking about the COVID guidelines, and they're changing all the time, and it's hard to wrap your head around. And some of them maybe make some sense, and some of them don't make a lot of sense. And it's this time that we're really faced with dealing with the world's iniquities and their past prejudices. And even if I'll speak for myself. I thought I was already dealing with that. I thought I was facing all that crap. I could tell you I wasn't, because you could go on a trip and go somewhere and plan a trip for 2 months, and we're distracted in so many ways that we're not distracted anymore. And um, yeah, but so I'm happy to be part of the community that is pushing this industry forward and not letting it stay in a terrible mindset. And hopefully public policy will catch up.
Yes. Well, you're doing a great job informing the public, especially on the financial side when it comes to the cannabis industry. And I'm just so happy that you agreed to come on, every month and just share your knowledge and expertise as to what you're seeing in the industry. And yeah, I mean, what do you want? Is there anything else that you want to leave the audience with before we sign off today and talk about?
I think what I would say is I like to caution people not to get freaked out by share price. Like, for instance, when I see Chiron that I bought close to $1 and now it's somewhere hovering around 33 cents. I'm not saying that it doesn't make my stomach hurt. I'm not saying that I don't question my thesis. I do, and it does. But I also understand that it's the long game. And I think if you're really invested in the cannabis stocks, and again, there's a difference between people that are trading and there's difference between people that are investing. And I'm talking about investing again with all the disclaimers that I mentioned at the beginning. But investing to me in the cannabis space is picking winners that are going to be there long term. Not that's the next flash in the pan. Not that's announcing something based on the latest trend, but really entrenched and is doing the research and has the capital to be able to take it, the distance. So don't get freaked out. The listeners and the investors that are watching and listening and freaked out about the share price or the charts, or I think be in it for the long game and just tell yourself that this is a long game. And I think the projections for growth right now are pretty, they're double and triple what they are currently. I would put the growth projections even more than that. So if you have a company that's going to be able to take advantage of that, I think let that keep you comfort when your share prices are heading down a hill.
Absolutely. No, that's sound advice, and it's still so new. The industry is still growing and maturing. So, I think it's good advice in terms of think of it as a long game, unless again, you're a day trader and you're looking at this stuff, every minute of the day. So stick in it for the long.
Right.
Well, Rena, thank
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
so much for coming on this month. We really appreciate it, and I really look forward to what every day. Like we said, everything's changing, and so I look forward to next month and see what developments have happened and talk about those trends.
Absolutely. I look forward to it too. And kudos to you for hosting a great show and for building it. And I'm really excited to be a part of it. And write us, text us, tweet us, write us um, what you want to hear about, what you want to know, and excited to talk to you next month.
Yeah, that's a good point. Next time, guys, we'll shoot out a message or a tweet and some posts maybe a couple days before, just to get any questions or comments that you want to send in, and then we can cover those on our podcast. That's
Yeah, awesome.
no.
And good luck with the move, man.
Thank you. Yes, we're about halfway done. We're chipping away at it, but when the movers come, it'll be all said and done, and we'll have a new podcast studio. So different.
Hey, well, I'll say goodbye to this podcast. It's been great for my first two appearances. Excited to see you in your new place, though. A lot of luck with it.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, and you stay safe out there in Tel Aviv, and we'll talk to you next time.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin.
All right, thank you, and thank you everybody for listening. Bye bye.